"You can't be serious," Rachel exclaimed, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and excitement. "A week in the middle of nowhere, just us?" "I'm dead serious," Mark replied, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. "It'll be just what we need, a break from the city, no distractions." The two friends had been planning a camping trip for months, eager to escape their mundane lives. Rachel had been feeling stifled by her office job and Mark by the never-ending demands of his studies. The invitation had arrived in the mail, a beautiful handcrafted scroll with the words "The Whispering Woods" scrawled in ornate calligraphy. It promised a week of serenity and adventure in a remote campground. They packed their gear into the trunk of Mark's old Toyota, the scent of pine and earthy musk from their sleeping bags mingling with the faint aroma of gasoline. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right as they drove deeper into the dense forest. The trees grew closer together, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the winding dirt road. The camp was smaller than Rachel had imagined, nestled in a clearing surrounded by ancient-looking pines. The man who checked them in, Mr. Jenkins, had a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his handshake was cold and clammy. Despite her unease, Rachel pushed the thoughts aside, telling herself she was just tired from the long drive. They set up their tent under the glow of flickering lanterns. The air grew thick with the scent of campfire smoke and the distant hoot of owls. As they unpacked, Rachel stumbled upon a peculiar book titled The Lore of the Whispering Woods. It was filled with tales of the forest's dark history, of campers disappearing without a trace, and whispers in the night that could drive a person mad. Mark laughed it off as campfire folklore, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the book was trying to tell them something. The first night was uneventful, the quiet only pierced by the occasional rustle of leaves. Rachel lay in her sleeping bag, listening to Mark's rhythmic breathing and the comforting patter of rain on the tent. But as the night deepened, she began to hear whispers. At first, they were faint, almost like the rustle of the fabric around her. But they grew louder, clearer, more insistent. Rachel sat up, her heart racing. "Mark," she whispered, nudging him gently. "Do you hear that?" Her friend stirred but didn't wake. Rachel strained her ears, trying to discern words from the murmurs that seemed to come from all around them. They grew closer, wrapping around her like invisible tendrils. She could feel their cold, unseen touch on her skin, raising goosebumps. The whispers grew more intense, the words becoming clear. "Speak not of us," they hissed. Rachel felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. She had to tell Mark, to get him to wake up. But as she opened her mouth, she felt a strange pressure building in her chest, a force that seemed to forbid her from sharing the secret of the woods. Panic set in, and Rachel realized she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her eyes darted around the tent, searching for a way out. The whispers grew to a crescendo, filling her head with a cacophony of voices, each one more insistent than the last. "Speak no evil," they echoed, "lest you summon our wrath." Rachel's eyes grew wide with terror as she understood the true cost of their curiosity. The whispers grew quieter, retreating into the night, leaving her trembling and gasping for air. The next morning, Rachel tried to dismiss the experience as a vivid nightmare. But the book lay open at her side, a page marked by her trembling hand, with the very same warning staring back at her, "Speak not of us." Mark yawned and stretched, oblivious to Rachel's distress. She didn't dare mention the whispers, fearing she might bring whatever malevolent presence they'd encountered closer. They spent the day exploring the woods, Rachel's eyes darting to every shadow, every rustling leaf. Mark, ever the skeptic, teased her for being jumpy, attributing it to the ghost stories they told around the campfire the night before. They hiked through the dense foliage, the damp earth squelching beneath their boots. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for a slip, a word out of place that would give it power. As they returned to the camp, Rachel noticed that Mr. Jenkins was nowhere to be seen. The other campers they passed by seemed unusually subdued, avoiding eye contact. Their conversations, when she could overhear them, were hushed, filled with cautious glances at the trees. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the very air was thick with secrets. That night, the whispers returned. Rachel lay rigid in her sleeping bag, trying to ignore them. But they grew louder, more demanding. "Speak of us," they urged, "and we shall grant your heart's desire." Rachel felt a strange pull, as if the very fabric of her reality was unraveling. She wanted to scream, to tell Mark, to wake him up and make him listen. But she knew she couldn't. The whispers had made it clear, to speak of them was to invite them in. The whispers grew more seductive, whispering promises of freedom from their mundane lives, of wealth and success beyond their wildest dreams. Rachel felt her resolve wavering, the temptation to speak, to bring this all-powerful force to their aid, almost too much to bear. Mark stirred in his sleep, muttering incoherently. Rachel reached out to him, her hand shaking. She needed to break the silence, to share this burden. But as her mouth opened to whisper his name, a sharp pain shot through her. The whispers grew angrier, louder, filling her mind with images of the forest's vengeance. Rachel clamped her hand over her mouth, tears of pain and frustration welling in her eyes. The whispers subsided, leaving only the echo of their malicious laughter. Rachel lay there, her heart pounding, trapped between the horror of what she'd heard and the fear of what would happen if she ever spoke of it. The days blurred into a tapestry of dread and anticipation. Rachel walked on eggshells, avoiding any topic that might lead to the mention of the whispers. She watched as Mark grew more restless, his eyes reflecting the same curiosity that had drawn them to the camp in the first place. The whispers grew bolder, speaking to her in her quiet moments, playing on her insecurities and deepest desires. They promised her everything she'd ever wanted if she'd just tell Mark, just once. On the fifth night, Rachel couldn't take it anymore. The whispers had infiltrated her dreams, twisting them into nightmares of her loved ones suffering, all because she kept their secret. In the early hours of the morning, unable to sleep, she slipped out of the tent into the cold embrace of the woods. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moonlight pierced the canopy, casting eerie patterns on the damp earth. Rachel took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew she had to do. With trembling hands, she picked up a stick and began to etch the words into the soft bark of a nearby tree. The whispers of the whispering woods. As the bark gave way under her makeshift knife, she felt a rush of energy, a warmth that spread through her veins, filling her with both relief and terror. The whispers grew silent. Rachel stepped back, staring at the words she'd etched into the tree. For a moment, she felt a strange sense of liberation, as if she'd unlocked a door she didn't know was there. But the silence that followed was deafening. Suddenly, the trees around her began to tremble. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. The whispers grew louder, no longer confined to her mind. They swirled around her, a cacophony of ancient voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Above, the moon was swallowed by a mass of inky clouds that rolled in with a ferocity that seemed almost alive. The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves with an ominous intensity. Rachel knew she had made a grave mistake. The whispers grew to a fever pitch, and Rachel felt a force pushing against her, urging her back towards the camp. She stumbled through the darkness, her eyes searching the horizon for any sign of light. As she reached the edge of the clearing, she saw the other campers, their forms illuminated by the flickering embers of the dying fire. They were frozen in place, their expressions a mix of fear and awe. Rachel knew they could hear the whispers too. The whispers grew so loud that Rachel could no longer think straight. She fell to her knees, her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. The pressure in her chest was unbearable, and she felt the urge to scream. But she knew if she did, she would be lost to them forever. The whispers grew louder still, filling her with a sense of dread that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the cacophony ceased. The trees stopped trembling, the wind died down, and Rachel was left gasping for breath in the silent clearing. The camp was still, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl, now seemingly taunting her with its innocence. Rachel looked around, her eyes darting from camper to camper. They were all staring at her, their eyes filled with a mix of terror and accusation. The campers slowly approached, forming a tight circle around Rachel. "What have you done?" one of them whispered, their voice barely audible. Rachel knew she had to come clean, to tell them about the whispers and the book. As the words began to spill from her lips, she felt the weight of their collective dread pressing down on her. But she couldn't stop, she had to explain, to warn them all. The moment she finished her story, the whispers started up again, louder than ever before. Rachel watched in horror as the campers' expressions changed, their eyes glazing over, their smiles twisting into malicious grins. They began to move in unison, closing the circle tighter and tighter. Rachel's legs felt like jelly, her voice a mere croak as she tried to back away. "You've brought them upon us," the campers hissed in unison. "You will be the first to pay the price." Rachel's mind raced, searching for a way out, but she knew there was no escape. The whispers grew more frenzied, their power now palpable in the air around her. The campers reached out, their hands outstretched, their fingers elongating into claw-like appendages that gleamed with an unnatural light. Rachel turned to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. The whispers grew to a roar, the force of them pushing her to the ground. She felt the cold, unyielding grip of the earth beneath her, the whispers now a living, breathing entity that was consuming her. She opened her mouth to scream, but the only sound that came out was a final, desperate whisper of her own, "Mark." The campers descended upon her, their twisted forms a blur of shadow and moonlight. Rachel felt her mind begin to slip away, the whispers now a symphony of malice and hunger. As she was dragged into the dark embrace of the woods, she heard Mark's voice, faint and distant, calling out to her. But it was too late. The whispering woods had claimed her, and Rachel knew she would never leave this place.